Today our topic is going to be quite different than what I would normally address. For one, it's going to be about history. Years ago, there was a song that says, I don't know much about history. And in my case, I didn't know nothing about history because I didn't care about the past. I wasn't interested in what happened way before I was born or even my great-grandparents. I was just more interested in how to navigate life right now. And I found out that history does play a part in our lives. You know, Julian, when you think about the American history, we have a very good overview, and we're taught in elementary school about the history of the United States. Doesn't mean it's always accurate, but for the most part, we know the key figures that are present are close to accurate. What if in the United States we had no history to tell us who the prior presidents were, what happened in each of the colonies or the different states, how they became ratified? Would that make a whole lot of confusion for this generation in 2025?
Not really at all. I mean, see, the thing about history is that here's always thought about history. You either like it or don't like it, or either you want to know about it or not know about it. You don't have like a in between. It's always like people that like history and people that don't like history at all. So, would it have mattered? I wouldn't think so.
Well, in my case, I didn't want to know about history. But in my position, I had to start looking up some information so that my interpretation would be accurate. So it wasn't a matter of me wanting it or not wanting, I just wasn't interested. But when I think about how it impacts us today, history is very important. Let me give you an example. For many years and centuries gone by, we had to deal with a lot of diseases, horrible diseases that eradicated people from all walks of life. When my mother was younger, there was a thing about the scarlet fever, and my mother had scarlet fever growing up. Prior to that, you'd see measles, mumps, bubonic plague. You'd see all of these things. What if we didn't have any information at all about the prior diseases? How would the scientists ever have started trying to eradicate these diseases? So in many aspects, science, history is important. Let's take food and water. For many years, there was no sanitation program. And in the sanitation program caused other diseases. So if we didn't pay attention to history, we would have never known that these diseases were their core beginning was. So although we may not be interested, when it comes to a long-term effect, it does impact us in a massive way. So as a young student, I could care less about that. But as time changed and I began to mature, I wanted to know why these diseases were causing people to die. If I had not gone back to history to find out where the implementation, can't even say it, implementation, well, you know what I'm saying, started, then there would have been no way of knowing how to address water that was tainted and how it affected the body. So history is important in many aspects. When it comes to science, it's an absoluteness essential. What about when it comes to architecture? That's absolutely essential. Me being raised on the Navajo reservation, we saw many hogans, and they're really kind of a mud-thatched house, and sweatgons where they go in and do the sweat house. In our part of the country, or where we live not too far from all of this, was regular standard houses. But I remember a time when there was no air conditioning, and it didn't seem like the heat got to us. But as time progressed, things got hotter, and people were dying of heat stroke and heat exhaustion. So learning about ventilation, air conditioning, heating are absolutely essential, and that is a part of history, probably a part that most people don't think about. When we look at things that naturally affect us on our intake of food and vitamins and minerals, etc., knowing what causes a problem is helpful to know how to address the problem. So I would say there are many ways that history is important. It's not just about, do I want to know if Abraham Lincoln was the president, was shot in the theater? Okay, I know that. I know that according to what we've been taught. Have I ever questioned it? No, never not. What about Mount Rushmore? Now, Mount Rushmore has got these presidents on the front of it, and I never understood why, but everybody went to go see Mount Rushmore. And then there was talk about adding other presidents as time progressed. They were a part of the American history. And when we look at the other statues and monuments that were very active through over the years, we will see where the war between the states, the war between the ethnic groups was in fact a factor. If we shut our eyes to a history, then when they say history will repeat itself, it will. Because we didn't learn from the previous generations or last 100, 200 years. So although in one aspect we can say I could care less about history, history plays a vital, important part in our lives, whether we feel it directly or indirectly. Julian, you work at one of the largest plastic companies in the United States. I think it's probably the only one that I'm aware of that's of its magnitude. What if your company that you work for knew nothing about plastics and put people on machines just to run and operate them? What do you think the outcome would be of this plastics company?
It wouldn't last.
It would have burned down. But because someone had the knowledge about what worked and didn't work, this company has been thriving and making the majority of trash bags throughout the United States. So we can say, I don't care about history. I don't care about biology. Maybe you would care if you knew how it really impacted you.
And it does impact you, because if you look at, I'm not one, when I was younger, I really didn't care about history, more so when I got to high school, because it was all, they wanted you to learn something that they tainted. I guess you could say it that way. But in an aspect of history, you wouldn't know where your grandparents or their great-grandparents passed down recipes or heritage or looks or, so history, it is a deep connection with our lives. It doesn't just, go away, and whether you want to know it or not, but because you'll always go back to that history and say, well, I remember when such and such, this happened in my life, or this happened with my grandparents or my kids, or in a relationship. So history will always be there, whether we like it or not.
True. Absolutely. The other thing, if you look at, I remember when 9/11 happened. And I remembered what the country was like before 9/11. And I remember the horrific event. Now, we can debate who started it, who didn't start it, what happened all day long. But the fact remains, those buildings were attacked and imploded, exploded and down to the ground. The details of that are vague and are very debatable. However, the fact that we saw it through television and other ways, radio, we heard about it, still was an indication that that event took place. It's a part of history that impacted thousands of people all across our nation. There have been many other incidents since 9/11, and I'm just bringing up the fact that history plays a part. What if I said, I don't believe 9/11 happened? And there's all kinds of evidence that proved 9/11 and the Twin Towers were attacked. Would I be right by just saying, well, I don't believe it? You can have your belief and I can have mine. Would that be the approach that I should take? Or should I weigh out the facts? Should I look at the facts objectively? Should I look at what's right before my eyes? On things in recent years, I say at least the last 100 years, or 125 years, I remember the stories that my grandparents told me about the first automobile coming to town. But what if I didn't want to believe that because I'd never seen an automobile? Would that make me right? The answer is no, it wouldn't make me right. It would mean I lacked in knowledge. The people perish for a lack of knowledge. We can stick our head in the sand all day long, but at some point in time, we've got to pull our head up, out, and look around us, get some sustenance, food, and water, or we just are a dead ostrich. We might not feel like these things are important, but they do impact our life. Society and culture all over the globe impacts our life. We're in Jerusalem. It's a very different culture than the United States. We've been in Mexico for about 15 years, and that country is completely different than the United States. Everybody wants to go to the United States because they've what the media, the television, and society has thrown out. It's the place where you make all your dreams come true. Well, I never thought it was such a great dream, the American dream, that I own a house, that once the mortgage was paid off, I would still paying on that house for the rest of my life. And then when I passed on, my children would be paying for that house for the rest of their life, etc., and so forth and so on. How is that American dream when it's an American bondage? Cars are made to last only a set number of years because you've got to buy another one. When my grandparents were alive, my grandpa believed very strong in a product. And that's the only kind of product that he would buy because it lasted the test of time. And he could have his vehicles 10, 15, 20 years, and there'd be very little, if any, repair. I remember this. The same thing was true with appliances. There was only one place that my grandparents would buy appliances because they knew that that product would last the test of time. They wouldn't be changing it out every 2 or 3 years. So American dream does not mean updating constantly. It means it's not necessarily a guaranteed product to last any time. So when my house cost me about when my car cost me about 1/4 of what my house was, and I've got to replace that car at least 5 to 10 times in my life, sometimes more. How is this a dream? I consider it a bondage and a nightmare because the knowledge was not passed on for durability or sustainability. It passed on just for commercialism. Now, I guess you're probably wondering, how does this have to come in with anything? So many people say, if it's not written in the Bible, I'm not going to believe it. Well, there's a lot of things that are not covered in the Bible. A lot of things. And we find out through history. I don't give much credit to archaeology, to be very honest with you. The main reason is because carbon dating is not a foolproof way of finding out when and what century that came through. Neither is some of the other forms of writing. But let's go with what we know. The Bible as a whole, regardless if you call it Christian, Jewish, etc., had many issues that were never dealt with. We were explained that those little symbols that before each of those chapters, it might have like 3 or 4 verses and a little symbol. We were told that that indicated a different time frame. You know what I really think it meant, Julian? They couldn't explain those few verses, so they're going to jump forward.
Right.
The intricate details, do they matter? Well, we've got people that will hold to the death that what was written in the scriptures matters. But I want to ask Stacy, Mike, Julian, all of you that are listening, this important question. Do you know what the prophecy of Ezekiel was about? Does anybody know the answer to that question?
No.
I can't say I do or remember.
It's about the valley of dry bones, where these bodies are going to reassemble and come up, raise up an army. Now, this was under Ezekiel. The chapter in Ezekiel, it meant no sense. The wheel in the middle of the wheel.
Because it kind of sounded like it was talking about the Pirates of the Caribbean, so that was similar. to the dry bone thing. They did have one in one of their films, but yeah.
Well, I guess you could say that's a pretty close example. But the point is, the prophet Ezekiel was supposed to be a powerful prophet, but nobody ever saw flesh come back onto the bones and they get up and rise up and walk. So would that be a true prophet? Well, it didn't happen in that time, so maybe it's supposed to happen in our time. Nope, it won't. Those stories, whether you want to face it or not, have an origination, an origin of history and a point. And if it didn't happen in that, quote, prophet's time frame, then it is a false prophet. But nobody will ever speak of that. We look at the book of Isaiah. Isaiah foretold of the Messiah, a king that would come and would lead the people to peace. Okay? They use Isaiah 9 and 6 as a prophecy from Isaiah that says that unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, etc., 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 end. And they waited until thousands of years later, and they made the declaration that Jesus was the Messiah. But what they didn't know, there were many historical events that took place that fulfilled that Isaiah 9 and 6. So am I saying Isaiah was a true prophet? I have no idea. And I won't make those declarations about the prophets because I don't want to waste my time on ancient history when it comes to somebody's prophetic view. They talk about how Israel will collapse and rise up and collapse and rise up, and that's supposed to be a current prophecy. But in fact, that's happened throughout the years. So it isn't really applicable either.
I got one for you. What about the Antichrist? It seems like every generation there's one that people always try to fit the scriptures to fit that person. It's like every generation there's one. And when it doesn't happen, it's like, well, it wasn't meant to be, or that wasn't really the person, but what would we be saying that then? Why would we try to fit that narrative to that person, try to say that he was the one when he wasn't?
Well, couldn't we say that every generation has already had an Antichrist? If you look at it in one sense of the word, throughout the generations, there's always been an Antichrist, I guess you could say, per se. Even now, I mean, let's say it's not just a particular person, but a movement. They have social media and powers that be, political or whatever, have dissuaded the society to move away from God. When that thing happened that for 2 years that I'm not going to say the name of, they closed down the churches. People couldn't go to church. People couldn't, they didn't have anything to believe in. They couldn't interact with each other and everything. So it was similar to an Antichrist. You see what I'm saying? So it was like every generation has already had that Antichrist that they face, not in a particular person, I guess you could say, but as a epidemic or as a whole, as a group, a society that now, even present day, they already have the Antichrist established because they've moved everybody away from God and put it towards social media and what they can dictate how life should be.
And I do want to insert here, we're not talking about Antichrist as far as Jesus Christ. Christ means anointed one. So we need to kind of look at that word in a couple of ways. The truth of the matter is, yes, there has been Antichrist, but let me show you something very, very interesting. If you know anything about the book of Revelation, you're going to find that people speculated the entire event. They had the Left Behind series. And boy, that was really something that was captivating. Really got your attention, really made you think. But do you know, in the Bible, it says that if you speak against these things, then you're cursed. So the Bible, being written by men who supported it through their own ideology and control, knew that if they could terrify a generation into believing that a deity was going to come up that was going to control the world, The New World Order does support that. But has it ever crossed your mind that everybody runs around afraid to be called the Antichrist or anything in that category, when what they're really saying is, don't you dare question the Bible. Don't you dare ask questions and get inquisitive, because if you do, you're the Antichrist. Does that make sense? It doesn't. So let's use fear to make everybody feel like there's going to be one main individual that rises up in the last days and is going to issue the mark of the beast. And so the New World Order, or the elite, have tried to follow very closely that scenario in order to bring fear and anxiety and destruction of faith. I have had people say, I don't care what you say, I believe in the Bible. Okay, I'm going to throw this out at you. Tell me what part of the Bible you believe in. What part of the Bible was where your strength was at? Was it in words? Was it in statements? Or was it in a life? I didn't know the life of these people. And in fact, there's no documentation in the Bible about the true life of these people. So when you see about the Antichrist rising up in the last day, we all would be considered of the Antichrist. Because if we do not totally agree with the Bible, we're in the opposite side. And that's how they would gauge you. You're forced to believe something that you really don't believe. And another thing you really can't support. Recently, I was corrected about the fact that I would take history, secular history, and base it on whether the Bible was true or not. I'm going to say, minus history, Julian, Stacy, Mike, I can see by the power that is not in that book that it was not substantiated by truth. If there was power in that book, every life that read every life that read that book would be changed immediately. Every life would be changed just by reading the word, because we're told that blessed are they that read and understand, that there's certain blessings that come from hearing it. Countless time, years go on, people in desperation will pick up that book. But that book does not tell them how to navigate through the problems of their lives. That book does not give you anything but bits and pieces that you can glean out of there. It's kind of like having a can of mixed nuts. They always put some in there you don't like, or I don't like. Maybe you do. And I can remember my mom would get these cans of nuts, and I'd be picking through them because I didn't like some of the nuts. And I have found since then, being in this country, the nuts taste completely different than in the United States. So I have found that I do enjoy some of these nuts. But I would pick through them, and sometimes I'd get down to the bottom of the can, and I'd just pour them out on the table, and I'd pick through to find the nuts that I enjoyed. Julian, the same is truth about people when applying scriptures. They only want the nuggets that make them feel good. And they walk on these verses as if it is the Holy Grail. And that's troublesome to me. When I have pointed out different articles to different people, and I've been met with opposition, I expect that. I never expected anybody to totally believe me. I expected for them to be curious enough to do their own research, but not just to hit me with total resistance. I'm not even going to look it up. I'm not even going to read it. I know what I believe. Now, here's one for you, Julian, Mike, Stacy. I was running the research on Joshua because he followed Moses according to what we have been told. But once again, there's no evidence of a Joshua that existed. And you would think if he was such a mighty warrior, it would be throughout all the different countries about this mighty warrior. Because Israel Judaism, Hebrew, was not the only civilization in society. Joshua's reports of such great and mighty feats would just been in so many texts written throughout the globe as a substantial evidence that this is happening. And when you look at, and here's one for you that people are so ignorant. When you look at the word Joshua, it has been said that it also comes from the word Yahweh, and that Joshua is the same as Jesus, which comes from the word Yahweh. Now, did that just get mixed up for all of you Yahwehians? You won't speak of Jesus because he's he's not of God. But you'll speak of Joshua, who when the name is translated means exactly the same thing as Jesus does. So you see, if there was consistency in the scriptures, there would not be confusion in the translation. Now, on that one note, saying briefly, Yahweh is not in the Bible. The Tetragrammaton is not mentioned as such in the Bible. It's 4 letters. And you have to be a Hebrew scholar to translate it. Excuse me. I'm going to throw another one at you, Julian. People say there were 12 tribes, right? But they say 10 of them are lost. So can you explain to me, after all of these centuries of this knowledge of Judaism, how 10 tribes got lost and can't find their way home? Why is it only 2 are acknowledged? They've had enough DNA testing to determine where their lineage is, but nobody can find the 10 lost tribes. But you know, for the Mashiach to come, the Messiah to come, for the return of Jesus, all 12 tribes must be reunited. That's a part of the prophecy. Well, this is just something for you to think of, not that it really makes any difference. But how do you lose a group of people? How do you lose 10 of the 12 tribes? How do you just have no idea where they went to when you know that some of these came from Poland and Germany and the Hispanic countries? How had you lost the other 10 when you knew where some came from? You see, the problem, Julian, that people run in with me is because I want to know why. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. How did this happen? Who did this? If it was impactful enough, and I've said this about the life of Jesus, if Jesus really did exist, then why is that well over at the old city that's called the Pool of Siloam, why is it bone dry? It would seem to me that that pool being active with angels still coming down annually to trouble the water would only verify and validify, make it valid that Jesus existed, and so were the miracles that happened during his time frame. But let's not go there, because that's things that people really don't want to know about. They'd rather believe a lie and be damned.
No, here's one thing that always got to me. It's like, if you really believe that the Bible is an infallible word of God, then let's take the Christians. Christians will stand and die with the New Testament, but they will pick and choose stuff only from the Old Testament, meaning that they don't believe the whole thing. They just pick and choose. So how could that be? If you believe that the whole Bible is an infallible word of God, then why would you pick and choose? I never understood that. If you believe the whole thing, then apply the whole thing. Don't just pick and choose here and there. You know, one thing that I was telling somebody recently, that I told him, look, here's the way I see it. It's like a self-help book. You know, you can read in a book that's self-help, you know, for any subject or anything, and you can glean stuff from it. Doesn't mean you're going to put your life, you know, on it. You're going to stand on it, but you can glean stuff from it. I go, same thing in the Bible. Just you can glean stuff from like any other book, but I'm not going to stand and die on it.
We're thrilled to introduce you to a collection of compelling and inspirational books penned by incredible authors who have navigated life's challenges and emerged victorious through God's unwavering love and mercy. One of these fantastic books is Fighting Hell Headed to Israel, written by Cheryl Remington. Another amazing book is Be Ye Holy, Survivor's Guide, written by Cheryl Remington. Another amazing book is Indy's Tales of the Infamous J.D. Kilo, Only God Knows, written by Bo Charles. Then there is this phenomenal book, I Wear My Cape Under My Dress, written by Stacy Rocha. There is yet another amazing book, The Unexpected Journey, written by Felipe Giovanni. And finally, there is this amazing book, Shame Walked in Wearing My Face, written by Stephanie Ballard. You can find all of these books on Amazon.com, and well as our website, www.cheryl-remington.com.
Thank you for watching Cheryl Remington. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to be notified of any and all future videos.